So Jamal Nxedlana is a South African artist working with photography and textiles. He's now based in Switzerland, and he created some artistic objects during his residency, and he will present them.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Susanna. So yeah, my name is Jamal Nxedlana, and I'm a visual artist. I work in photography, textile, and video. And yeah, this is it's a bittersweet moment because it's really nice to be here and to be presenting my work and what I've been doing over the last 3 months. But it also marks the end of the residency, which is very sad for me because it's been an incredible journey. Okay, so my aims during the residency was on reframing the way that we look at used clothing. So there's this idea that used clothing is waste, and I wanted to propose the idea that used clothing is not waste, but rather a resource, and a resource that can be used to spark innovation and creativity. And specifically, my motivation to reframe the way that we look at used clothing is because of my background and where I work, or where I have been working up until now, and that's been on the African continent in Johannesburg. And yeah, I really wanted to contribute and complicate, or maybe make a more nuanced, add some nuance to the prevalent discourse around used clothing, specifically when it comes to the relation on the African continent. And there's this idea that used clothing is dumped by Western countries in centers like Johannesburg, Nairobi, etc., all over the continent. And yes, of course, this is partly what's happening, but I think if we look at it only in this way, we make people on the continent victims, and we kind of present them as not being able to, being passive recipients, of situations that they're facing. And this is very much not the case. So, I mean, if you look at the, 3 people up on the screen now, these are not victims of waste. These are people who are able to take used clothing, and whether it's upcycling used clothing, whether it's styling with used clothing, it's starting organizations that process used clothing. And this is, these portraits were taken by myself last year in Johannesburg, the biggest used clothing market in Johannesburg. It's called Dunusa, and these were just, this is not staged in any way. It's just a random day. I was at the market, and I came across these people and asked if I could take their portrait. So I've obviously been working on this idea and project for a number of years now, I would say at least 2 years. And I've kind of been focused on mapping the used clothing ecosystem, specifically in Johannesburg, but I've also visited other centers on the continent. And the mapping has included, visiting spaces, pinning them, location pinning them. It's also include drone shots. I've used 360 camera. I've also worked a lot with collage. And as a kind of method, or I guess like as a form of drawing, a digital drawing, in this process of mapping the used clothing ecosystem in Johannesburg. And over time, and in a time that was closer, I guess, to when the residency was started, I started to think about ways of presenting this mapping of the used clothing ecosystem, and develop, I guess, visual methodologies around mapping. And one of the ways I did that, you can see on the left, so these are all labels that I kind of pulled from used clothing, and used textile sort of swatches, and specifically the color, as a way to visualize like data. And the data that I was visualizing in this case was where the item of clothing was manufactured. So for example, the ones that are like blue on the left, or have like some sort of like blue or navy base, were garments that were produced in Italy. So you can see a lot of clothes that were produced in Italy were landing in Johannesburg. Anyway, this was one of the ways I started to work towards creating a method of, in a way, a method, but also creating a portrait. And this sort of production ramped up, I think, when I got here on the residency. And I became very interested, together with this data visualization, I started to look into algorithms, specifically an algorithm called YOLO, which is you only look once, and it's an object detection algorithm. And this also contributed another visual logic and contributed to the methodology that I was kind of like using. So you can see, there's kind of like a fracturing, and this comes from, the way that a box would go around like either a person or an object in an image when using this YOLO algorithm. Okay, and these are just kind of like more experiments which I've been doing and developing the visual language. Okay, and then I think one thing I didn't mention was, I obviously mentioned this idea of like reframing the way that we look at textiles, but for me, through the residency, I was really interested in conducting various experiments and exploring ways that you can work with used clothing in order to produce objects for contemplation and objects of value as well. So I then, something else that I started to explore was sublimation print. And I actually worked with Lobra on that. So thanks, Barbara, for supporting and being there for this process. So I printed various images, again, images that I had shot in Johannesburg using the printer that I guess allows sublimation prints. I also salvaged textiles from used clothing, and sometimes home textiles as well, and then printed on top of these, again, just experimenting with, you can see it's sort of like, there's a picture, but you could see that, for example, the textile in the middle was like before this was like a black and white, like just print. You can see on the left, it was like a sports jersey, and on top of this kind of used textiles, have created a print on top. And through the process of the residency, I have taken these prints from used clothing, these sublimation prints, and I have reintegrated them or placed them into the environment here in the eastern part of Switzerland. So these are textiles that have been draped on flowers in Arbon, very close to the lake, and then I've rephotographed them. And these textiles, these sort of sublimation prints, have become subjects in their sort of like own right, and it's become subjects that I'm photographing, and I think it's interesting they become a subject, but also it speaks very much to the ways in which used clothing is moving through the world. And coming from maybe being designed in Germany, produced in China, being worn in France, and then going to Dakar. So kind of really trying to reveal these things, but in like poetic ways. Another thing that I explored during the residency was stains, because I found one of the reasons people get rid of clothing that is actually perfectly good is because of stains. A lot of pieces you find in the Brocken houses. So I was shopping a lot in the Brocken houses in Urban. And in fact, I need to thank Ivan from Lustige Lade, who donated like, I think 8 huge bags of like used clothing to me. So that was super amazing and very helpful. But a lot of the clothing, I'd pull them out the bag and I'd be like, this clothing is in perfectly good condition, but maybe there's like a stain, you know? So you realize that a lot of the reasons why people give these clothes or donate these clothes, discard them, whatever it may be, is because either it has a stain or it's no longer fashionable. So in this logic of reframing this idea of waste as opposed to resource, I started to photograph these stains, and I kind of took just using traditional focal length, but then I also photographed them at a microscopic level, and I did this also with one of the partners at Textile Colors Lab. Photographed these stains at a very microscopic level, and this is one of the results. This image has been converted to black and white and inverted into a digital negative. I then took these photographs and created collages and textile motifs. And from the textile motifs, I created 3, so I'm basically calling them textile reliefs because of their 3-dimensionality. But yeah, I kind of thought maybe a better word is also soft relief, which could be interesting as well. But it's because of the 3-dimensional nature. So the one that you see here is 4 home textiles which have been bonded together. And then it's been the stain collage or motif has been laser cut from it. And for the laser cutting, I worked with Danilo at Werkpark, and also Danilo was super generous, and yeah, always at any time I wanted to come in, it would be super inviting, and with working with me. Also, I didn't mention, this is another thing that Barbara from Lobra assisted with, and that's bonding of textiles. So there's a double-sided adhesive film, which I kind of used to bond all of these textiles together. And this is another version of this soft relief, which you can see here. It was just a bit big for the display, so you don't necessarily have to look now, it could be afterwards, but yeah, you can have a closer look at it. Then another experiment was thinking of ways to create a form which can then be sculpted out of using textiles. And the way in which I started working towards this was sort of draping. So as I was cutting all of these different pieces of used clothing, I had a lot of textile scraps. So I started to work with the textile scraps, kind of using a draping kind of logic, and this is one of the forms that I had created. And then from this form, further developed it into something that's more, I guess now it has this quality of like a vase, but I think, when looking at, the previous drape that I had done, it's just something that I noticed and something that almost emerged, and I sort of went with that, and I'm exploring these various forms now. And the idea is to basically create sculptures using textiles. And it's been quite an interesting process because there's been a lot of challenges. So you see there's a textile brick, which this was like one of the tests that I had created. And obviously I'd never done something like this before, and I believed that there'd be some sort of machine that I could use to, form, chisel, cut this textile brick into, the forms that I had imagined. But I found that it's basically impossible until I started to speak with Sitterwerk. And there is a way now, which is, it's to work with, so each layer, of textile, to coat it in epoxy and then layer each coated piece one on top of the other, mechanical press, and then use a CNC cutter. So this is something that I'm currently in conversation with them about now, and something I'm feeling positive about, and I feel like there's a possibility that it may happen. But just to kind of, a little bit more of context of, these textile bricks, I really wanted to show the material value that's embedded in textiles, but also the historic value, the cultural value, all of these narratives that are layered in used clothing and used textiles. And that's kind of why this becomes like it's not the top of the fabric, which I guess would be like normally the surface, but it's really it's building up of these layers. In a way, it becomes, a lot of people have, spoken about it as like strata who visited the studio and made like, I guess, geological references, which again, I think, in that sense, yes, I think it makes sense. It really does represent these histories that are kind of like embedded in used clothing. So I think, that was it. I'd just like to express my gratitude to the team, Marianne, Martina, Niels. It's been incredible. And I'm not exaggerating when I say, I think every day, I've thought back and just thought, wow, I'm so lucky to be here, so thank you so much.
We will have a short conversation. I will relocate just for framing reasons. So my first question would be, as you now work with textile, and textile is something which is very close to the body, and would you consider the textile as a kind of interface?
Yes, I would say so. I guess it hasn't been something that I have thought about, maybe directly in my work, but I think, this idea of histories, personal narratives embedded in textiles, in that sense, I think, in a way, this idea of, textile as the interface is something that's kind of been there, like a kind of like just latent relationship with what I've been doing, I would say, But really for me, I think it is these like, it's these personal histories. I mean, one thing that has been super interesting for me has been like the smells of clothes. And specifically when creating these bricks, because you use like steam, heat and steam, it emits, it emits. And I know if someone is a smoker or not. I can smell it in the textile, So there's so many things I can learn, and this is also a rabbit hole that I kind of want to go down. Learning more about smell, and through the smell, like through the soap that they were using, or whatever smells that I can, extract from the textiles, what narratives or what image or portrait can I create from that? And I think, a lot of the work, even these sort of like market views, these collages are about, I guess it's funny because then I go back towards like portraiture, which, I have also this background in photography, so
So the textile and the body becomes like one. And I was also wondering, because you mentioned also the agency, not only from the agency of the Global South, but also the agency of the material, so itself. Mm-hmm. So do you think there's also a kind of a political aspect in your work?
I would definitely say so. I think, very directly political, in this, specifically way of complicating or maybe making more nuanced, this idea of Africa in relation to the discourse around, clothing being dumped on the continent. So I would say it's very much, directly, because I think, with a lot of the challenges, a lot of maybe the prevalent discourse when it comes to the African continent is that there's one perspective, there's like one idea about what Africa is or what Africans are, et cetera, and I think this is never the case, and this, in these instances, this is when, biases are able to, proliferate, et cetera, and yeah, I think for me, how can it be more nuanced? Because I think, it's a lot more complex than, so it's directly political, I would say, definitely,
Also about raising awareness for these stereotypes and very narrow narratives, and you want to give positive narratives.
Yes, definitely.
So can you talk also about the aspect of collaboration in your work? I know that you have also been working with communities in Johannesburg, I think. And what was new here to work with more specific knowledge, and can you tell some experiences you when you worked with other communities in Africa?
Yeah, I think it's different relations. I think here the relations have been it's been about the work, and it's been about expertise. So, and that's kind of what we've connected on in the Swiss context with everyone that I'm collaborating, is what is the material or what is the technique. For example, I mentioned Sitterwerk, and the conversations that I'm having with them. And I think it's different. But also, I've been here for a very short time and maybe haven't had the opportunity to, and especially within the frame of this residency, I don't know if there's another potential way to build a community, I guess, connect and build community. But I think it's been different, of course, in South Africa, where I was working. I think, yes, there, it's a lot more to do with common experiences, supporting one another, mutual aid. These sort of relationships are really inform the collaborations. So it's basically how can we come together to build something or to create a better space for ourselves, but also those around us. So I think, maybe, and potentially there's more of a need for that, in a South African context. I'm not sure though. I think, it's difficult to say now because I really haven't been able to engage, fully with the community here.
And what about future collaborations here? What are your learnings on which collaboration you want to pursue?
Yes. I mean, this is only the beginning for me. As I said, these are all sort of experiments, and I think they're going to eventually develop into work. Obviously, what I'm very excited about now is because it's what I'm working on now is the textile brick and finding a way to sculpt it. And I'm hoping that it's possible with Sitterwerk.
Yes, they have a really amazing expertise at this place.
Yeah.
So maybe some questions from the audience.
I just wanted to say thanks. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's Julian, who I haven't seen in maybe 7, 8, 9 years. Yeah. So thank you for coming.
Oh, amazing. Any questions for Jamal? No? Okay, so maybe,
just wanted to speak a little bit about the stains. And sometimes in the museum, in the heritage world, we say, stains and dirt and degradation are part of the material biography of an object. And I like that here is a stain is newly born, so to speak, in a different, it's begin its life, rather than being, it's kind of this transformation. So thank you, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a positive narrative of
Michelle.
the stain also because.
Hey, Jamal, I think I asked you this before, but would you be interested in continuing this dialogue between the global south and global north in other continents from the global south, like thinking of the used clothes, the cultural approach of used clothes?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. And as you say, I wasn't aware of the used clothing dump in the Atacama Desert and you kind of told me about it, and I've kind of done a little bit more research about it, and it's interesting because it's I think from the outside it seems as if the context is very similar, specifically in relation to used clothing. So yes, of course, I'd be very interested to explore more, to visit. And I think, in fact, I can't remember his name, but there was an artist whose work I saw in Bern a few months ago, and he was from South America. I can't remember exactly where he was from, but he was working with Hawaiian shirts, and he was kind of like cutting up the motifs of Hawaiian shirts and creating these installations. And we got to speaking, and he also told me, he was like, yeah, we have all of these markets with all of these clothes. For them, a lot of the clothes come from the United States and Canada, but very similar like context. So that was also super interesting for me. And yeah, the rabbit hole is deep. So definitely be interested. Yeah.
Yeah, the world of textile is infinite somehow.
Yeah. And I think this question is going to become more and more important, this question of used clothing, because, every year, exactly, every year there's more and more clothes produced. So I think right now we're dealing with, there's obviously like a lag, and right now we're maybe dealing with the textile, I'm not going to call it waste, but, there's a sense that it's textile waste. We're dealing with that from maybe 5 years ago, and think of all of the stuff that's being produced and purchased now, and that's going to hit the markets and hit in the next 5 or so years, and what was being produced is a lot more than what was being produced 5 years ago. So
it's still growing.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
we should think about degrowth.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah.
So wonderful. I think we will proceed to the last presentation. Thank you.